All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here on a little bit of a blustery day in the last day of April, as it happens to be. I'm Steve Sanaciro. I'm the state senator here in the 10th District, which includes Bristol, where we are right now. I'm joined by my friend and colleague in the General Assembly, State Representative Tina Davis. We'll be hearing from her in just a minute. We have a number of folks with us today, and I want to thank them for being here. Bristol Township, Craig Bowen. Craig, where are you? Thank you, Council President. Appreciate you being here. All of our first responders, the chief of the fire company in Bristol, Kevin DiPolito, we're going to be hearing from him in a bit. And a guy who is a longtime friend of mine, and I seldom refer to him this way, but I will today. Former State Representative John Cordisco. And that's appropriate that we do refer to John that way, because although John has long been a leader in our community in so many different ways, he was also a legislator. And we are, after all, here today to talk about the introduction of legislation. And that's a process that John knows well. So we're here today to talk about a bill that Tina and I are introducing in both the Senate and the House as a consequence of the tragedy that occurred just behind us back on the afternoon of the 23rd of December of last year. That tragedy took 3 precious lives from us that day. And while what we are proposing may not have prevented those lives from being lost, they certainly can make the environment of an emergency like this safer, both for residents of facilities and first responders. We have across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania a number of residential facilities like the one behind me that address a number of needs in our state, whether it's for older people, people with physical challenges, whether it's for children, whether it's for people in recovery. And they all have something in common. They are places where people go to look for support and care, and where there is an expectation of safety. Now, we cannot pass laws that will provide for every circumstance in which people could potentially be put in harm's way. But what we can do is pass laws that help to mitigate potential problems when tragedies occur. And we can do our best to protect our first responders at the same time, so they are not needlessly put in harm's way when these tragedies happen. So that is what Tina and I are attempting to do with this bill. Let me describe what it does, but before I do that, I want to give you a sense of what the law requires right now and why, in fact, there's a gap and a shortcoming in what our law has. But before I do that, I just want to pause for a minute to thank 2 people in particular, actually 3 people I should pause to thank, who have helped us get to this point. Certainly Kevin DiPolito and all the first responders, but Kevin has worked with Tina and me in helping to review this proposed legislation and offer ideas and areas where he knows from experience the law needs to be changed. So Kevin, I want to thank you for that. Secondly, the aforementioned former State Representative John Cordisco, who represents a number of clients who were victims of this tragedy, and he'll be talking about that in a bit. He was one of the people who contacted us early on to say, you know, I think that there are things in Pennsylvania's law that need to be changed, and you guys should look into that. So thank you, John, for bringing that to our attention. And last but not least, you know, the press, you all play a very important role in not only covering these stories, but also exposing where things go wrong and things that can be changed moving forward to avoid tragedy in the future. And I want to call out in particular Jo Chevalier for doing that, because she really was out front on this issue in bringing this to our attention. So, Jo, I know you're taping us right now, but I want to thank you for what you did here, because I think it will make a difference in the long run. So let me talk a bit about the current law. Under existing federal and Pennsylvania law, emergency plans must exist for facilities like this. In other words, they must have plans of what to do in case of an emergency, but they need not share them with local first responders. They have to maintain them if they're a nursing home, if they're a Department of a health and safety regulated facility. Those are personal care homes, daycares, but they do not have to share them, and that's a problem. They're typically maintained internally, reviewed by regulators during inspections, but as I said, not required to be shared in any standardized way. There is no uniform statewide requirement. They vary from types of facilities and which regulatory agency is responsible for them. So there's no single cross-agency framework governing emergency preparedness, and we believe that that needs to change. So this is what we are proposing and what we will be introducing in both the Senate and the House in the coming days. First, what we're proposing will impact the following types of facilities: nursing homes and other healthcare facilities, personal care homes and assisted living residences, child daycare centers and child care homes, drug and alcohol treatment facilities and recovery houses, and other residential or day-use facilities serving vulnerable populations. Here are the key requirements of what will be hopefully part of the law once this passes. First, the covered facilities must develop, maintain, and implement a written emergency preparedness plan that addresses fire, explosion, evacuation, shelter in place, and other hazards. Second, the minimum plan elements are as follows. There must be accountability procedures to track and account for all residents, staff, and visitors during an emergency. I want to pause on this just for a moment, because one of the things that we heard from Kevin and some of the other first responders that night here in Bristol was that our first responders rushed in not knowing exactly who was still in the building, because there was no log of who was there and who had left. There were many residents who got out pretty early, but they didn't know that because there was no log. And the danger of that, of course, is that you're asking our first responders to go into harm's way, into a dangerous situation where there's a threat of building collapse, a threat of further explosion, a threat of fire, when perhaps they didn't have to do that because everyone might have been evacuated already. So we have to make sure that the law requires a clear plan for how we track who's in the building and who has left. A designated on-site emergency coordinator with authority to communicate directly with first responders. There should be no guesswork when a tragedy occurs and first responders arrive. They need to have a point of contact. They need to know exactly who that person is. That helps, obviously, with communication and making the rescue, if necessary, more expeditious. There needs to be pre-incident information such as facility layout, access points, building systems, utility shutoffs, which we'll hear more about in a bit, and evacuation procedures. Obviously, all this stuff sounds self-evident, but again, it has to be spelled out in law. Next, there must be coordination with first responders. Facilities must provide their emergency plan to local police, fire departments, EMS and rescue squads, and the county emergency management agencies. Plans must be shared upon initial development, after each annual review, and within 30 days of any material revision to a plan. Fourth, annual review and updates must happen. Facilities must review and update emergency plans annually to reflect operational and structural changes. We know in any of these environments that operations change over time, and we also know that their construction happens, additions are made, other changes happen internally within buildings. Those updates have to happen. 5, enforcement. That has to happen, of course. It must be enforced through the existing licensee agencies, Department of Health, Department of Human Services, Department of Drug and Alcohol programs. Compliance should be a condition of licensure, and plans must be reviewed during inspections or surveys. Next, confidentiality. Security-sensitive portions of emergency plans are exempt from public disclosure under the right to know law, and that needs to be the case. Current law does not require facilities to provide emergency plans to police, fire departments, and EMS. We know that that has to change, and as we said, that will. And I believe with that, I've covered all the portions of the legislation that we're proposing. And at the end of all of the speakers today, we'll open it up to any questions. So if you have any questions about what I just went through, please, feel free to ask those at that time. But with that, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, the state representative for Bristol Township and Borough, Tina Davis. Tina?
Thank you, Steve. I just want to thank all the first responders here, the township, Craig Bowen. We have the hospital, we can't forget them, and the nurses and doctors that were here that night. It's really sad that we have to wait for an emergency or devastation like that for us to figure out how to tackle these problems. And that happens often in the state because there's so many old laws. But I appreciate it, Joe, coming up with the plan. Hey, you deserve the credit, so thank you. I am now going to introduce my friend of 20 years now, Kevin. I was on council with Kevin. He's the chief fire marshal. He's the chief of the fire department, and he has a third hat too, so come on. I don't know what it is.
Thank you, Tina. As the senator said, I was asked to provide input into this law, and after consultation with Chief Burns of the 3rd District Fire Company, Deputy Chief McGoldrick from 3rd District Fire Company, we agreed that the greatest challenge that night was the accountability of everybody in the building. It would be the residents, the employees from so many different departments, vendors that were on site at the time of the incident, getting accountability and knowing were they all out, or did we have to continue our search efforts inside that building, which at that time was well laden with natural gas and within explosive limits. So as the senator said, there were probably extended searches that went on in that building that were unnecessary because we thought we had everybody, but we continued searching and searching to make sure because we didn't know. And this vulnerable population, you have to remember, some of them can be nonverbal. They can have cognitive delays. So they may get startled or confused in a situation like this and not be in a location where you would expect to find somebody when something like this happens. So the searching and the search efforts were extensive and very, very thorough for an extended period of time. And we are very hopeful that with the passing of this law and the sharing of the plans, that subject matter experts, whether it be fire or police or what have you, can look at these plans and see if there's any suggestions that we can make for them to tighten up their plans and make their workplace safer, to make the location safer for the residents, and of course the emergency responders that are going to respond to these incidents. And I want to thank the legislators for their efforts in putting this law forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Chief. And again, thank you for your input on the draft of the bill and at the outset when we were thinking of an outline for this. Next, I'd like to introduce once more my friend and former state representative, John Cordisco. I was going to say colleague. He is a colleague in so many different ways. And he is playing a very important role in this tragedy, but also in, as I said at the outset, bringing to my attention and Tina's attention the need for us to take a look at state law and where we could improve things. John?
Thank you, Senator.
Yep.
Just for the record, Steve was in diapers at the point that I served as a state representative, but I do appreciate the comments. Just as additional piece of information, that I am one of the three members of the lead team regarding this litigation. And we've been notified by the National Transportation Safety Board that we will receive a pretty thorough report by December of 2026, which will detail what they believe happened and where obviously fault lies. But I'm not here today to talk about the litigation piece. It's more the legislation. So many lives were impacted by a tragedy that should never have happened, one that could have been prevented. Today, I would like to take a moment to share the story of one of those victims. Her name was Felicitas Motani Ndutu. She was a remarkable woman who came to this country from Kenya with her family in search of a better life. They became proud American citizens. Felicitas was one of 12 siblings, and she embraced many roles in her life with love and dedication as a mother, a wife, a sister, and aunt. She was also a nurse, a caregiver to those who could not care for themselves. Her commitment to others was unwavering. During the chaos at the Bristol nursing home that night, she did not abandon the people who depended on her. She stayed, continued to care for them, and in doing so, she paid the ultimate price with her life. Though she's no longer with us, Felicitas will not be forgotten. She was just 52 years old. She lived in Bristol Township with her husband David and three sons, Camus, Joseph, and Clinton. This legislation, known as the Preparedness Requirements for High-Risk Facilities, is intended to ensure that the most vulnerable members of our community are protected, that they are placed in environments where safety is not an afterthought, but a guarantee. I personally want to acknowledge Senator Sanacero and Representative Davis for their leadership in working to strengthen the current law. I also want to recognize Joe Surveyor of the Courier Times, whose investigation brought critical attention to the failures in the system governing nursing homes. Joe and I were on the phone quite frequently for a period of time there, and as she gained more and more information, there was more and more, I guess, of an opportunity to make a difference. So, Joe, thanks. And I also want to thank our first responders. And rightfully so, that night, they saved lives. That's not been mentioned. We lost 3, but for these people that are here today, we'd have lost quite a few more. They are undoubtedly our heroes, and sometimes are an afterthought. Not today. Not today. It is our responsibility as a community to come together in support of this effort to create meaningful change. 3 lives were lost, many others injured. Let us honor those we lost by ensuring that a tragedy like this will never, ever happen again. Just because I want to make it just a tad more personable, so that we have a face to a name. That was Felicitas. So, may she rest in peace. Thank you, Steve.
John, thank you for sharing that and for putting literally the face of this tragedy in front of us, because after all, that's what the change that we're proposing is about. It's about lives. It's about families. It's about the people who are impacted by tragedies. You're never going to be able to prevent some of these tragedies from occurring, but we can be better prepared to deal with them when they do happen, and that's what we're here today to talk about. Let me also add, John rightly lauded our first responders, and I want to share, and I know Tina as well, everything you guys did, and the real courage that night of going into that building and putting yourselves in harm's way, not knowing whether the building was going to collapse, whether there'd be further explosions or fires. I also want to thank all of the medical professionals at Lower Bucks Hospital. Because that night, when we were here with Governor Shapiro, After we had the press conference and the governor and Kevin answered some questions about what we knew at that point, we all went into the hospital to talk to the nurses, to talk to the docs, to talk to all the other attendants and people who were helping out. And they really did amazing work as well. And they really are heroes in this story, too. So we want to thank them as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question.
Shocker.
Who is that?
As far as I know, there were no gas detectors in the facility.
Okay.
And as far as I know, there's no requirement that there be any kind of gas detector. Obviously, gas detectors in that facility would have been helpful.
Right.
Probably prevented it even exploding.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that something that you think should be added?
Well, I was not aware that that's the case, that there were no, and Kevin's shaking his head, there were, in fact, no gas detectors in the building. It's certainly
Have notified the fire department in the county.
correct. Well, it's certainly something we can take a look at.
Steve?
John, you have some?
Just the point, I believe that the National Transportation Safety Board is going to address that specific issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also serve currently on the SEPTA board and have dealt with them on a regular basis. I, never knew that they had jurisdiction over gas lines. The transportation of gas through those lines falls under their jurisdiction. But I expect that they're going to talk about that issue and several others that may even at some point present an opportunity to even strengthen that piece of legislation.
Right. And John, I think you said earlier in our discussion before the press conference that we expect that the NTSB will have its report done sometime at the end of the year?
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. So that's true. I would not, we'll take a look at that, Joe, by all means. It might make sense, though, on some of those issues to wait until the NTSB has its full investigation wrapped up and we've reviewed their report to see whether there can be additional legislative fixes that we propose. I do think it's important that we move forward with this bill as drafted now, at least, to make sure we start this process and can put these basic requirements into law as quickly as possible. Other questions? Yes.
Do we have a sense as to how broad of a reach this legislation might have? Like how many of these high-risk facilities, the daycares and nursing homes, are in the state?
I don't have a specific, so the question was for, if you haven't heard, because we don't have mics on everywhere, was approximately how many such facilities would be covered throughout the state, the ones that I described that the legislation would apply to. I don't have an exact number of that, and we can get that for you, though. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. Well, again, I want to thank all of you for being here today to report on this very important issue and this legislation as it moves forward. I want to thank Tina and Kevin and John and all our first responders, as well as our medical professionals who were so critical that day. And hopefully we can move this legislation quickly through both chambers and get it to the governor's desk so that we can do our best to make sure that we're protecting both the residents of these facilities as well as the first responders who are called upon to address these tragedies and these incidents when they happen. Thank you.